All right. Thanks, everyone.
So let's move to our next keynote profile. I'm pleased to introduce our keynote speaker, Dr. Elizabeth Sarah George from
Hi, share. Is my screen visible?
Yes, ma'am, you can continue.
Oh, hi. So I would like to present my work on how we construct meaning during a crisis situation. And I would like to present my work, which was conducted on corporate professionals um, during the pandemic, and how the reality of their lives at that point, how it helped them to construct meaning, and how that reflected in the situational coping strategies that they devised, which helped them, or which rather enabled them to survive and during a crisis such as a pandemic. So we'll first look at how so the study, as I said, it explores the construction of meaning and how it shapes reality. So the pandemic was a point where it impacted every sphere of the lives of people across the globe. So here we're looking at one category of professionals, corporate professionals, because prior to the pandemic also, the kind of work stress and the kind of um, stressors and the crises and the challenges that they faced on a regular basis was already something that was heavily researched upon, as it was a very exhausting profession where it was causing a lot of mental health problems and marital issues in professionals. Therefore, during the pandemic, how was their reality shaped to something as a researcher I set out to study? So, another reason for exploring corporate professionals was that the demands from the global markets itself, it transformed the way the professionals looked at the markets. The pandemic also transformed the way of living in many households at this point, which is what we're going to look at. How did the way in which the transformation, so whatever challenges happened within their lives, the way it led to a particular meaning making process, which also reflected on how they started living around the pandemic becomes crucial, because these were actually survival skills which helped, or it showed the kind of grit and determination they had to cope with anything that came their way. And it's also very relevant because we live in a world which is highly unpredictable. We live in a world where we have a lot of eventualities and a lot of issues coming up every day. So, being prepared, being aware of how to go through or navigate through challenges becomes an important survival skill that all of us must have. Therefore, this study looks at how one group of people who were expected to perform under any pressurized or any challenging situation and to deliver extremely high results became very important. So we'll see how the way they navigated through the crisis and how did they actually take charge of their lives would be explored in this particular presentation. So the specific themes are the way the life itself was restructured during the pandemic with regard to the professional and marital lives. So here in this study, I conducted a qualitative study where we focus on a particular approach called transcendental phenomenological approach, where you capture the experiences of the participants and how they constructed the meaning out of it. The qualitative data that was obtained for the study was analyzed using Colizzi's descriptive phenomenological approach. And here we're going to discuss four of the emergent themes were that were formulated. The four emergent themes reflect the construction of meaning and the reauthoring of their lives as they navigated through their professional and marital lives during the pandemic while experiencing drastic transitions in their way of life during the pandemic. So, as I already mentioned, the quantitative control studies did address well being. However, this present study captures the lived everyday experience of well being in professionals and how they construct meaning out of their experience. So, for the study, professionals from banking, telecom, and IT were um, interviewed because prior to the pandemic, as well as during the pandemic, certain characteristic traits that were unique to these industries were long work hours, excessive deadlines, demanding customers, changing nature of job opportunities, lack of flexibility, and lifestyle diseases. So, it showed that during the pandemic, as well as prior to the pandemic, the way the stressors impacted their physical and mental health and well-being were already shown to be drastic. So wanted to explore and see how did they navigate through this. So the research design of the study is a transcendental phenomenological study where the main focus is of a transcendental phenomenological approach is to capture the lived experiences and essences of the participants and yeah, the research participants that I interviewed were 20 Indian married corporate professionals who were employed in corporate organizations across India, US, and UAE from IT, telecom, and banking sectors. And we have a few participant selection parameters, such as um, I interviewed professionals who were married and who've been working in the industry for more than 2 years. And there were also professionals who it was mandatory to interview only professionals who had excessive target, longer hours at work, large teams to work with, and they also had the professionals who had large teams and who were coordinating across departments were chosen for the study, and those who recently experienced traumatic life events and those who joined as organized as trainees were excluded from the study because those who recently experienced traumatic life events would be the study would put them at risk for severe mental health issues. Therefore, due to ethical reasons, I did not interview. So we used purposive sampling method where since the study had a very predetermined selection criterion, they were the selection the participants who would be interviewed were already decided in advance the kind of sector, the kind of roles. So therefore, we used a purposive sampling method here. And purposive samples are determined by data saturation, which is a point in data collection where new data no longer contributes towards additional perception on the research question. So in this particular study, I reached data saturation by the 15th interview. However, I conducted 5 more to ensure that I had reached a data saturation point. So the primary way of collecting data here has been a semi-structured interview schedule, which offered an outline, however, also offered the flexibility to the participants to decide the course of the interview. And a socio-demographic form was also given to get additional details of the professional who were interviewed. So the Colizzi's descriptive phenomenological method has few steps actually. Once we're familiar with the transcribed interviews, the significant statements were extracted from the transcripts, and these were phrases that were directly connected to the phenomenon which were identified, and meanings were formulated for the significant statements. And during this process, meanings formulated which are interconnected were categorized to form cluster themes. The interconnected cluster themes were then grouped to form emergent themes. The cluster themes and emergent themes were exhaustively described. The participants were also asked to verify if the themes that emerged in the phenomenon identified aligned with their lived experience. So here, we'll be looking at the few themes that we formulated in the research. The first was the context of the study, the context of the participants. So the point at which when they entered the COVID-19 pandemic, where were they in their professional lives? How were they situated in it? The kind of economic pressure that we all experience globally was something that corporate organizations also experience, and the direct impact of it was seen on these employees. as a lot of companies also decided to sack employees, and which showed that a lot of them who had spent more than 10 years in the organizations, they were forced to prove their worth again, which meant they were stretched beyond their limits. So one of the excerpts here talks about how I had a team of 14 and all of them got sacked. I was attending meetings all the time. It was quite exhausting. So it shows how they were completely pushed to the brink. There were a lot of participants who would wake up at 3 a.m. They would work till 3 a.m., then wake up at 6 a.m. and work. So this was their life for almost a year. So this is another important significant theme. So a lot of them functioned in this manner where they were just working 24 into 7 for almost a year, which is when they realized the pandemic is not going to go on, is going to go on, is not going to stop anytime soon. And also they realized the organizational patterns have also shifted. A lot of these companies also shifted to a remote or a hybrid working model, which meant the kind of expectation of work from home where they were expected to work round the clock was continuing in a lot of organizations. This is time, and also this was a time where there were a lot of global changes which threatened their own professional future, because a lot of them were used to a particular work culture, work nature. They were trained in a particular way, and that is when, with the advent of AI, the kind of job opportunities that were already there were not something that they were trained to take over. So this is a time when a lot of them were in a point where they did not know how to go forward. There was a lot of excessive stress already in picture, and there was excessive uncertainty about the future. So this is when they learn to take charge of their work life despite the chaos. So this was a point where, as professionals, they felt more equipped to handle changes because they did worry, but they also learned to upgrade. So embracing AI was one way forward that a lot of them were grateful they had the resources to embrace. So this is one point which helped them feel more in control over their work life, and it came because of the mindset they adopted, which was being very strong and positive. So on stressful days, according to one of the participants, I have to plan a different strategy. My motto is to keep exploring ways to find a solution to the problem. So this was a participant who was heading a team of more than 1,000 employees, and he was at a general manager level at a telecom company in India. And being a telecom sector which was heavily field based, when they had to go completely remote, it was extremely challenging and they had to deliver the results. So this was a time where the pressure of um, delivering the results with absolutely no situational support or the support from the field was a challenge. This is when they had to come up with very creative ways to bring in the workforce to make things go, because there was a lot of demand at this point for the services as well. And everybody was relying on the service providers as well. So the excessive stress at this point was something a lot of them were able to navigate by adopting a shift in their own mindset. At the same time, looking out for or thinking out of the box and embracing the technology that came their way. This is one way in which there was a turning point in the way they experienced their well-being and how they were able to construct. So the kind of meaningful process that happened internally is what helped them to bring about these sort of changes in their lives. Now, another important aspect that was explored was the stress a lot of them experienced in their professional lives was also seen to spill over to their marital lives. There was a lot of professionals who spoke about how they were constantly working, they were navigating between their professional lives and fulfilling their responsibilities at home. This was a point where they stopped living their lives. So, this was a time they experienced a lot of conflicts. There was a time where they could not emotionally and even physically, even if they were present, they were not really present in their marital lives or in their family lives. So, this was a time where they also credited, despite the conflicts and misunderstandings a lot of them experience, the kind of support and rhythm they experience from their partners, the feeling of working like a team is what helped them navigate through this challenge. So the marital stress, although was there, the kind of support system they developed for each other was very crucial to the way they performed at work and how they adapted to life during a crisis. And the kind of meaning making process which helped them stay flexible enough with their partners is very important. And we're looking at professionals who also had partners who were working. So it was the female professionals had male professionals who were working, and male professionals had female professionals who had equally demanding jobs. This was a time when they both learned to become flexible for each other and they learned to work as a team. So one of the excerpts spoke about how we both grew as individuals while working out our struggles together. My wife is a calmer person and a source of strength for me. She compliments me. So the kind of support they got from the home was seen to be very important in how they navigated through this crisis. The fourth important theme we're looking at here is the way, so once they settled into their professional marital lives, this was a point where they also realized that they had to also they most of them have been working a very hectic work schedule for the past 10, 12 years, and pandemic was also not easy on them. But after a point when they learned to navigate through the challenges, they also had some time when they were at home to reflect on their lives so far. This was when they felt much more connected with themselves. So they felt much more lighthearted and in harmony with the kind of connection they formed. So one of the excerpts spoke about how I'm getting the time to reflect on myself. I might not change that much, but I know what I am now. So I started writing. I wrote a poem about my problems that helped me to feel at peace with how I felt. So pandemic, as we all know, was never an easy phase for any of us. It created a lot of anxiety. It was a global health concern with its own economic challenges as well. So this was a time when there was a lot of anxiety. People did not know how to cope with. Most of the professionals had a situation-based coping mechanism they came about with, which the primary aspect was connecting with their inner selves and figuring out what they really wanted from life and from themselves. The sort of clarity they developed helped them to connect better with themselves and also with how they wanted to live around the pandemic. And this helped them feel much more at ease with themselves. And there was a lot of harmony that they experienced within themselves. This was shown to be extremely crucial to how they experience their well being. So the discussion of the four findings shows that the first theme, the kind of powerlessness, annoyance, and discontentment that the professionals experienced initially was also backed by the studies that were given, and this was also shown to impact the professionals' well-being drastically. The second theme, which was again how they took charge of their work life despite the chaos, it showed the patterns of fortitude and adjustment. And studies also showed that the professionals who adapted or were flexible had much better marital lives and also had much more productivity in their work lives and enriched well-being as well. The third theme, which felt the rhythm and the togetherness in marital life, explores ways in which professionals adopted adaptive ways to overcome the challenges with their partners, where they focused on feeling safe and enjoying the growth and oneness. So, studies also show that professionals who were able to bounce back at work had a very strong emotionally grounding system back in their homes. So, being the fourth theme, which spoke about feeling lighthearted and in harmony with their feelings, it captures how the professionals felt so connected with themselves once they settled into their professional marital lives. This was very crucial to their well being. And this was something that was very unique to the pandemic because it helped them. This was a theme that a lot of them said this experience was given the was given completely to the kind of shift in the work system that happened where they had some time after a point to slow down and reflect on their own lives. And this I feel is very important because all of us at some point need to take a pause and reflect on our lives because that also helps us to sort a lot of our pent up confusions, disturbances, and emotions that will keep troubling and interrupting us at different points in our lives. So the study had a few limitations. The study, being a qualitative study, was conducted only on 20 participants. Therefore, it cannot be generalized. Another limitation was it was limited to three sectors. Another limitation was also the time frame. Since the professionals had a very hectic schedule, I could only interview them once. If I had the time to interview them times, I would have had much richer data. And since it was conducted during the pandemic, I had to conduct interviews virtually, which is also why I had access to participants from across the globe. However, if I had a physical interviews, if it was possible, I could have accessed the nonverbal cues in a much better manner, which would have enhanced the richness of my data. And the age rating the participants were from 30 to 50 years. This wide age gap, it took away the consistency and uniformity in data. This were some of the limitations of my study. So the present study explored the process of meaning making in professionals. The future study should explore the cognitive thinking pattern in professionals, which helps them stay resilient. This data could be used to design interventions, advanced intervention modules, which can build resilience in employees and help them get prepared for crisis in the future. Yes, thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Elizabeth, for your meaningful and insightful session. Your work on well being and human experience was truly impactful.